Pahlavi text, translated by E.W. West, Part 3, Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad, Second Gumanik Vigar Sadar, Clarendon, Oxford University Press, 1885. We are in the introduction section. The Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad. The Pahlavi phrase Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad, Opinions of the Spirit of Wisdom, is a name applied to 62 inquiries, or series of inquiries, on subjects connected with the religion of the Mazda worshippers, made by an anonymous wise man, and answered by the Spirit of Wisdom. But as this name is only found prefixed to a manuscript written in 1569 of the Common Era, in which the first part of the work is missing, it is doubtful whether it be the original name of the book or not, although it is very suitable to the general character of the work. Regarding the reading of this naive here adopted, it must be observed that the correct pronunciation of the Pahlavi word Mainog, spirit, is uncertain. The traditional reading is M-A-D-O-N-A-D. You know, the upper little dent elongation on the O and A-D together, which is a possible pronunciation of its letters, but is otherwise inexplicable. Haug proposed to read Ma'in-evad or Minavad, but in that case the word ought to end with D equals T, or with ND. Some of the present Dasturs read Minoe, but this would be written Min-o-ek in Pahlavi. The Pazand writers have Ma'inyo, but this is evidently an imitation of the Avestan Ma'in-yavo, and does not correspond with the Pahlavi letters, as the word is Manu or Mino in the Sasanian inscriptions and Minu in Persian, to which words a final K would be added in the Pahlavi. It seems probable that the final letter of the Pahlavi word is not D or an elongated E, but G, a corruption of K. And if we're looking to the older cuneiform texts and the differences between one dialect or one language and another, it would be a G sound instead of a J sound. And that we ought to try reading Minog or Mainog. At the same time, it should be noticed that a very old copy of the Pahlavi Farhang in the Library of Dastur Jamasja Minochiharja in Bombay has the word written with an extra medial stroke, so that it might be read Minavand as required by Haug's hypothesis, although this copy of the Farhang gives Madanend as the traditional reading. See page 3, note 1. In reference to the Spirit of Wisdom. Okay. The subjects discussed by the Spirit of Wisdom are of a very miscellaneous character, and their discussion is evidently intended to furnish an outline of the tenets, legends, and morality of the religion with which they deal, but it forms by no means a complete or systematic treatise on these subjects, and it is remarkably silent with regard to all details of religious rites and ceremonies, which are only occasionally mentioned. And this silence may perhaps be due to the fact that the author was a layman, as seems clear from the account he gives of his doubts and inquiries in chapter 1, verses 14 to 56. Any incompleteness of the treatise may also be explained by the apparent loss of the latter end of the work, as this 62nd reply, chapter 63, terminates the extant text of the treatise abruptly and without any trace of peroration. By the spirit of wisdom, the author means the innate wisdom of Ahura-Mazda, chapter 57, verse 4. The Asna Kratu of Yasna 22, 29, 25, 18, through which the spiritual and worldly creations were produced. See chapter 1, 49 and 51, 57, 5. It was originally created by Ahura-Mazda. See chapter 8, verses 3 and 8. And is superior to the archangels. See chapter 1, 53. And it can appear in a personal form and undertake to be an instructor. See chapter 1, 57, 60, and 61. And it can likewise be used as a defense. See chapter 43, verse 6. With regard to the author of this treatise and the age in which he lived, we have no further information that can be gathered from the contents of the book itself. The author was evidently a devoted Mazda worshipper and probably a layman, as has been already remarked, but he has given us no further hints about himself. Whether he wrote before or after the Arab conquest of Persia is doubtful. There are only two passages that might be strained into allusions into Islam. One in chapter 1, verse 18, which alludes to some heterodox religion, inquiring the property of the Orthodox faith. But the author has just been talking of many sects, and the grievance here mentioned is much too common to be considered as applicable only to the Arabs. And of course, Islam is not a faith that is limited to the Arabs or puts Arabs in a better position, because it says, well, if you make the effort, you're rewarded for that effort, so therefore, so anything about, oh, well, they speak better Arabic, so they're better at Islam. No, that's not the opinion Islamically. The other passage is chapter 16, 37, 48, which describes the advantages of the moderate drinking of wine, and may be supposed to be written in indirect opposition to the Islamic prohibition of such indulgence. In either case, the allusion is certainly far too obscure to form a fair basis for argument. On the other hand, in chapter 13, verses 13 and 14, speaks of the sovereignty of Vistasp existing in connection with the most powerful sect or form of devotion, which statement might be strained to imply that the government was still orthodox, and that the definitions of good and bad government in chapter 15, verses 12 to 39, could hardly have been written after the Arab conquest. The allusion to the continued conflict of the Arumans and the Turanians with the Iranians in chapter 21, verses 23 to 26, may possibly refer to some troublesome wars carried on by the Greeks and Turks against the Persians in the time of the author, and the late Dr. A.D. Mortman has suggested 580 to 590 of the Common Era as a probable period for such remarks, but here again the allusion is too obscure to be relied on. Well, sometimes you want to be obscure so it can apply to different situations, right? Very few of the author's quotations can be identified, but this is no argument for a greater age than 8 or 10 centuries, as we know from passages quoted in the Shayast, Lashayast, Dadastani Danik, and other works, that some of the lost Nasks must have been still extant as recently as that. The Avesta is quoted only twice by name in chapters 1:27, 16:15. The former passage has not been identified, but the latter, perhaps, be from the Pazang Nask. Several quotations, however, are made from the Dino, or revelation, a term which, when it refers to writings, is often applied to Pahlavi writers to the Avesta only. Of these passages, chapter 44, verses 18 to 23, is from the Vendidad. Chapter 21, 24 to 26 may be from the Khirad, and 6 other quotations have not been identified. In other cases, the quotations are merely prefaced by the phrase, "it is declared." And of these, the passage in chapter 57, verses 24 to 28, appears to be derived from the Vendidad, and that in chapter 2, 155 and 156, from the so-called Hadok Nask, while 8 other passages are unidentified. In this last class, the quotations seem to be rather paraphrases than accurate translations of the original texts. Of the original Pahlavi text of the Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad, only 2 manuscripts are yet known to exist. One of these, K43, is contained in number 43 of the Iranian manuscripts in the University Library at Copenhagen, and then the other, TD2, belongs to Mr. Tehmuras Jinchauja Ankalasaria of Bombay. The manuscript K43 is a small quarter volume of 178 folios, of which the Dina occupies folios 2 through 37, written 15 lines to the page. The first and second folios also contain the conclusion of the larger Bundahis, of which the first 129 folios are missing from this codex, as described in Sacred Books of the East, Volume 5, Introduction, page 39 to 41. And the latter part of the codex contains about 1/5 of the Deen card in several detached fragments and 4/5 of the Bahman Yast. This manuscript was brought from Persia by the latter Professor Westergaard in 1843. See Zendavesta, or the Religious Books of the Zoroastrians, edited by N.L. Westergaard, Copenhagen, 1852 to 1854, Volume 1, Introduction, page 8, Note 3. And the Pahlavi text of the Dina, which it contains, was published in facsimile by Andreas in 1882. The book of the Mainog-i Khirad, also an old fragment of the Bundahesh, edited by F.C. Andreas, published in K.L. 1882. In this codex, the text of the Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad begins in the middle of chapter 128, but as the copyist has prefixed an introductory heading to this imperfect text, it is evident that he or some predecessor of his must have copied the work in this imperfect state from some manuscript whose first folio had been lost. Besides this deficiency, 10 folios of the text have been lost from this particular codex. 9 of these were occupied by chapter 14, 1 to 2749, and the 10th contained chapters 39, verse 31, to 40, verse 17. At the end of the work, chapter 63 is followed by a colophon to the following effect: completed in peace and pleasure and joy on the day of Shatva'iro, of the month of Van of the year 938 of Yezdakard, King of Kings, so the 26th of May, 1569, I, Mitro Apan, Anoshakruban, Rustam, Shatro Iyar, wrote it for my own possession, from the copy of Dastur Gadman Pirug, Aspendiar Gadman Pirug, and that from the copy of Dastur Shatro Iyar Vegan Khusro Isha, and that as regards these several sayings was written from the copy of the heavenly destined Mahvindad Naremahan with the righteous soul, and comes unto us from the realm of the Hindus. And Hindus isn't a race, right? May even our writing be in accordance with the will of the sacred beings. In addition to the date, the chief matter of interest in this colophon is the acknowledgement of the fact that the work had come from India, where the original Pahlavi text appears to have been since extinct. We have, therefore, in this text merely so much of the work as he reached India, on which the Pazan Sanskrit version of Naryosang described below was undoubtedly based, and the possibility of hereafter finding the latter part of the work in Persia should not be overlooked. It is, however, upon the text contained in K43, so far as it is preserved, that the translation of the Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad in this volume is founded. Of the other Pahlavi manuscript, TD2, nothing further is known to the translator than a copy of the passages corresponding to those contained in the 10 folios lost from K43, upon which copy the translation of those passages has been based. Besides these manuscripts of the original Pahlavi text, there exist other copies in which the text has been merely reproduced from the Pazan version described below, and of these copies, K22, number 22 in the University Library at Copenhagen, may be cited as a typical example. This manuscript is a large octavo volume of 56 folios of glazed Indian paper, probably about a century old, but without a date. The first 48 folios contain a corrupt Pahlavi text of the Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad, alternating with the usual Sanskrit version described below, written 19 lines to the page and extending as far as chapters 27, verse 41. The corruption of the text consists of the misuse of Husvaris equivalents and errors in orthography, which no old writer of Pahlavi would be likely to commit, such as writing kolavist for harvest, nafs mani darik for kvesini darih, barguman for aviguman, hame for hamai, avas for aubas, la and ma for all, denman instead of hana for the Pazan the constant use of the adjective suffix ik for the abstract suffix ih, and the frequent omission of the final k in such words as danak, avistak. It can be seen at once by anyone really acquainted with Pahlavi that a text of this description is merely a modern translation of the Pazan version by someone whose knowledge of Pahlavi was rather limited and artificial. Most of the Indian manuscripts of this work contain only the Pazan version written in short sentences, alternating with a word-for-word Sanskrit translation of each sentence, the Sanskrit being written upside down for the sake of forming a continuous line with the reversely written Avesta characters of the Pazan. This Pazan Sanskrit version of the Mainog-i Khirad, as it is called in Pazan, was compiled by Naryosang, son of Dhaval, a Persian priest who is supposed to have lived some time in the 15th century and evidently possessed a very good knowledge of the Pahlavi, though not sufficient to avoid some few mistakes, especially in reading foreign names. His authorship is attested by a Sanskrit introduction prefixed to most manuscripts of this version to the following effect: through the name and almighty power and assistance of the Lord Ahura Mazda. Okay, they're spelling it more the Avestan way here. The greatly wise, may the achievements be auspicious, and be the progress and success of the good Mazda-worshipping religion, and energy in body and long life for all the good and right-minded. This Pahlavi heavenly wisdom called Mainog-i Khirad is translated by me, Naryosang, son of Dhaval, from the Pahlavi language into the Sanskrit language and written from the difficult Parsi letters with the Avesta letters. You know, the ambiguity of the Pahlavi characters used in all Persian writings before the Arab conquest. It's not one of the languages that I can read for myself partly because of that, but largely because the texts are not easy to find. I think it's easier to find a transliteration than it is to find the text itself. For the joyful understanding of the good listeners to instruction, the true-minded salutation to the good, the pure thinking, the true speaking, the just acting. Of this Pazan Sanskrit version, the oldest manuscript that has been examined is L19, number 19 of the Avesta and Pahlavi manuscripts in the India Office Library in London. One of the manuscripts brought from India by Dr. Samuel Guyes, who was the head surgeon of the General Hospital at Surat from 1788 to 1795, and obtained several manuscripts from the widow of Astur Darabje, the instructor of Enquatil Iran. It is a small octavo volume containing 148 folios of old Indian paper, of which the first 132 lines are occupied by the Pazan Sanskrit Mainog-i Khirad, written, that's probably luck, abbreviations, 15 lines to the page. At the beginning of the text, the folio containing Naryo Sang's Sanskrit introduction described above has been lost, but the text itself is complete. At the end of the work is a Pazan Sanskrit postscript, which may be reasonably attributed to Naryo Sang himself, and can be translated as follows: completed for the peace and pleasure, happiness and dominion of all the good who were virtuous. To him for whom it is written, may it be well-resulting and well-omened, and after 150 years may he be a transmitter of it to his own religious children's children, through the will of the sacred beings, of whomsoever the best ability is not wisdom, that best ability of his is even then owing to it. Wisdom which is without learning is poor, and learning which is without wisdom is helpless. After this postscript, a Pahlavi colophon has been copied from some older manuscript to the following effect: completed in peace, pleasure, and joy, and ended, written by me, a servant of the religion, the priest Chatro Iyar, contemporary of Naryo Sang, and this is followed by a colophon in a very corrupt Sanskrit, which states that the manuscript was completed in the district of Naga Mandala at a date corresponding to Friday, the 19th of October, 1520, by the teacher Mehraban, son of Mahyar and grandson of Padma, for the priest Bahram, son of Palhan. This manuscript of the Pazan text is therefore nearly 79 years older than that of the original Pahlavi text, K43, upon which the present translation is based. It corresponds very closely with that Pahlavi text, and where it differs, the variation is nearly always due to some mistake or attempt at improvement on the part of Naryo Sang. It must, however, be acknowledged that very few translators adhere so closely to their original text as this learned Parsi priest has done to his. And Naga Mandala, probably an old name of Naus-Ari. Other manuscripts of the Pazan Sanskrit version are PA-10 and PB-6. The former is number 10 of the Enquatil collection in the National Library at Paris, and was brought from Surat by Enquatil Duperan in 1761. It is an octavo volume in which the Mainog-i Khirad occupies the first 211 folios, and commences with Naryo Sang's Sanskrit introduction, translated above, but does not contain the postscript. The date of its colophon appears to correspond to the 7th of December, 1649. New style. The latter manuscript, PB6, is number 6 in the Bernalf collection in the same library, and is probably about a century old. The Pazan version also occurs alternating with the Gujarati translation in K23, number 23 of the Iranian manuscripts in the University Library at Copenhagen. It is an octavo volume of 168 folios of glazed Indian paper, of which the first 162 contained the Pazan Gujarati text, written 15 lines to the page, and remaining 6 folios containing an index stating the contents of each chapter. A colophon at the end of the text has a date corresponding to the 25th of August, 1663. New style, and another at the end of the index states that the manuscript was written by the priest Gazadyar, son of Vikaja of Sangan, and finished at a date corresponding to the 17th of October of the same year. In another class of Pazan manuscripts of the Mainog-i Khirad, the Pazan text is written in the Perso-Arabic character and accompanied by a Persian translation, forming what may be conveniently termed a Parsi-Persian version. One example of this version is contained in MH7, number 7 of the Haug collection in the State Library at Munich, of which it occupies the first 70 folios, written 15 lines to the page. Most of the Persian translation is written in sentences alternating with those of the Parsi text, in which case the translation is merely a paraphrase of the Parsi, but in some of the translation is interlined, and this is much more literal, each Parsi word having its Persian equivalent written below it. This manuscript contains several other texts, and from 2 colophons, one near the middle and the other near the end of the volume, it appears that it was written by Darashah, son of Meherbanja, and the first half of the volume was completed at a date corresponding to Wednesday, the 9th of August, 1809. Another example of the Parsi-Persian version is found in number 2769 of the Persian manuscripts in the India Office Library in London, in which manuscript it occupies 75 folios, written 11 lines to the page. It is not dated, though probably written earlier this century. In this copy, the Parsi text is tolerably complete, but long passages of the Persian translation are omitted. When given, the Persian is usually identical with that in MH7, although some instances of independent translation occur. In addition to the Pahlavi, Pazan, Sanskrit, Gujarati, Parsi, and Persian text of the prose, Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad, the popularity of the work is further evinced by the existence of the 2 versions in the Persian verse. One of these was described by Professor Sakau in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, New Series, Volume 4, page 229 to 283, from a manuscript in the library of that society in London and written probably near the end of the last century. The author of this metrical Persian paraphrase seems to have been a native of Ravar in Sindh named Marzuban, who has composed it from a Parsi version of the original text, bequeathed to him by his teacher while he was studying the old traditions at Yazd, and the date of his composition seems to have been 1612 of the Common Era. His verses contain only 54 questions and answers, but these contain the substance of the greater part of the Mainog-i Khirad, as the work is called in Persian, with some few additions from other sources. A copy of the other metrical Persian Mainog-i Khirad occupied folios 527 to 550 in the second volume of B29, a 2-volume Cordo Rivayat, number 29, in the Bombay University Library. It is doubtful whether the original number of folios were 24 or 26, but only 22 now remain. These contain 497 couplets of introductory matter, 1,060 representing the text of the work, and 190 of the epilogue. and from 160 to 330 further couplets of the text are missing. According to statements in the introduction and epilogue, the verses appear to have been composed from Neryo Sang's Pazan Sanskrit text by the priest Hormazyar and his son Dorab, the latter being the actual writer and the former being a son of Faramruz, a son of Havamuddin, son of Ka'i Kubad, son of Hamkarapadam of Sungan, of the family of the priest Naryosang Laval. The work was commenced on the 7th November 1676, new style, and completed in 35 days, and the copy in B29 was finished on the 21st of November 1679, new style. The order of the subjects discussed in this metrical version differs in some respects from that followed in the prose texts, and the 1,060 couplets of extant text represents only 40 chapters of the work, though several of the others were no doubt represented in the missing couplets. Another copy of this latter metrical version appears to exist in pages 231 to 248 of number 12 of Anquetil's collection in the National Library at Paris. Of the Pazan text of the Mainog-i Khirad, chapters 57, 27, 62, 1, verses 51 to 61, 7, verses 9 to 12, have been published, with German translations by Professor Spiegel in his Grammatik der Parse Sprache, page 128, 255, 161, 273, 185, 186, 188, 189. He has also published German translations of chapters 2, 110, 293, 8, 37, 42 in his Traditionelle Literatur der Parsen, page 138 to 144, 147 to 150, and the complete Pazan Sanskrit text with an English translation, Pazan glossary, and grammar were published by the present translator in 1871. Since that date, the original Pahlavi text of the Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad has been discovered, from which the present translation has been made. And, okay. Being the son of Faramruz, a variation of the pedigree is quoted in page XLII. Are we... Okay, we are XLII. Okay. So verses 13 to 27 of chapter 2 of... Okay, what's the first book we have here? Dina-i Mainog-i Khirad. Okay. And son of Hamka Rapadam of Sangan, Bundahis, 10, 3, 14, 13, mentioned 282 or 272 in some copies. Okay. In connection with this account of the various versions of the opinions of the Spirit of Wisdom, it should be noticed that an abridgment of the work also exists in Persian prose and is called the other Mainog-i Khirad. A copy of this abridgment is contained in folios 71 to 78, MH7 described above, and consists of a very free Persian translation of the Pazan text of chapters 1, 14, 2, 64, 2 to 64, and 3 to 7, 14, 15, 21, 25, followed by a variety of short statements about thankfulness toward the sacred beings, the supreme heaven, male and female, angels and demons, wealth and poverty, and so on, and concluding with the names of the first sovereigns of the world, the descendant of mankind from Gayomard, and the 292 species of animals from the primeval ox. Another copy of the abridgment appears to be contained in the folios 80 to 84, the number 15 of Anquetel's collection in the National Library at Paris. And doing this, chapter 10, verse 3, 14, verses 13, mentions 282, and 272 is mentioned in some copies instead of 292.